were communicating with each other. I passed one on the bike lane, or she passed one on the bike lane, and he literally threw his lights on, came after us like he had just smelled some blood. I mean, the man had the steroid rage look in his eyes. My wife was petrified and started yelling at her, screaming at her. He looked like he wanted to crack some heads. I've made this statement before because I've never forgotten it. And I'm in the insurance business. I have a lot of clients. I have a lot of connections, and I've talked to a lot of attorneys, specifically defense attorneys, and they tell me what goes on downtown, and it's not pretty. And this was well in advance of what transpired with Kelly Thomas. I cannot believe for the life of me that for a city that's awash in liquor, that is just literally sprinkled with churches everywhere, that we have such a dichotomy on our hands, where we have such a flagrant display of how the system fails those who are not privileged. And it favors those that have all the protections on the planet with pole bar and body iron or body armor, automatic weapons in the trunk, weapons that we citizens cannot possess at home by virtue of the fact that we are not militarized police officers. So as the government and the media works lockstep in unison to propagate a system whereby they create the chaos to rule in the solution with draconian legislation, and as they move forward to disarm the American people, and it's an active agenda, and it's going at light speed. You can get yourself a couple of pizzas for a 45 these days. I hear Ralph's is giving away some gift cards. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sit in church and ask Jesus to forgive our sins and let all of our children go into slavery and bondage as we spend all of the money we don't have, and basically let our rights become eviscerated by apathy and your bamboozling with your slick PR programs and all of the cocktails and the wireless emissions that are turning everybody into zombies, and all of the, for lack of a better term, twisted psychology that's going on in the pulpits that doesn't take people to the edge of their seat where they need to be to stand up for what's right? Why does it have to take people from out of town where the average house here is 700,000? Why do we have people coming in from all over Southern California? Where are all the Fullerton residents tonight? I mean, what is going on here is simply an abuse of power. This man was singled out. You try to keep the lid off of this nightmare of a man being murdered by police. Rodney King walked away. Rodney King was a very large man who was involved in a felony. He was committing a crime. Kelly Thomas had no such thing as a defenseless, disoriented guy that was paranoid, no shirt, no money, no strength. His heart was ruined from a lifetime of hard living. And for you people all in this room to sit here and not see a problem with this and wonder why there's such outrage, it just behooves me to think that you would look down on anybody that has the audacity to challenge the status quo in this town. The status quo in this town reeks to the core, and it needs to change. Because I want to tell you something. There are 75,000 miles of circulatory system in everyone in this room, and the one who put it there is watching all of you. His name is Almighty God. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to close the public portion and bring it back to council. And let me ask Mr. Pro Tem, do you have any questions of staff or comments you'd like to make?
Well, I have a lot of comments, but I do understand that it's an ongoing investigation, and I'm afraid my questions would be soliciting information that is really part of that investigation. I am interested to see the outcome of it. Some of the questions I have, though, are of a policy nature and understanding how the, when the decision is made to deploy to go make an arrest. I appreciate your answer. And the fact that you have half of the out-of-town arrests are misdemeanor and the other half are felonies, I think, speaks that it's pretty
It's a misrepresentation. There was 3 to 11. There's 3 allegedly violent offenses according to 11. Let's represent the facts correctly.
Let Mr. Pro Tem finish his remarks.
Let's make remarks that are factual, though.
Okay, the understanding I got from the
Let's
chief
be
is
more
that
understanding in the facts.
Excuse me. You've had your chance. I'll let him have his chance.
Was it the last 5 years there were around 630 felony arrests and then 630 misdemeanor arrests?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so running with those numbers, and I have no way to dispute that. I'm going to take you at face value that is the correct number.
Excuse me, we've closed the public comments. Let Mr. Pro Tem have his chance to say.
There are a lot of, clearly there's a lot of questions about the policy of going out of town on a nonviolent arrest like this. I think part of it is the fact that the person who is arrested is somewhat of a public figure locally, and I'm sure that lends itself to a lot of the concerns that we're hearing. But some of the concerns I have to agree with. I have the similar concerns, but you know, because this is a criminal matter, I can't interfere with your job. That'd be inappropriate. I have to let this play out, but I can't say from a policy standpoint. It did raise some eyebrows with me when I first heard about it. It did seem like it was a disproportionate deployment, but I would imagine that is because there's facts that you're not able to talk about right now.
It was a
until
disproportionate.
The trial comes forward, and then the facts are laid out.
Thank you, Mr. Seaborn. Councilmember Fitzgerald, anything you'd care to comment on?
I would just say that I know that our chief has tough decisions to make all the time. I support this decision that you made, and I appreciate the job that you and your police officers do.
Recall.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Flory, would you like to comment?
3 of them killed someone.
Excuse me.
Jennifer.
Excuse me.
3 of them
You
killed
had your
someone.
chance.
That's what you respect.
Okay, let the others speak now, all right?
Councilmember Flory wants me to go first, and since I had requested to have this item agendized, I do want to say that I want to thank the chief for addressing some of my concerns, and I do look forward to following up, you providing me details involving these arrests so that I may be satisfied. I do have very large concerns involving possible lack of objectivity as regards this topic or selective enforcement. I do feel very strongly about defending members of the public's right to film or live stream or take photos in public spaces. That right, that freedom needs to be aggressively defended. And if it's crossed the line now to where that is a criminal act of some sort, then I will continue to shine a very bright light on any friction that comes from those type charges. I understand that there is no ongoing investigation. There's only the follow through on prosecution of these violations. And I would just say that as a council member, I've been on this council for 3.5 years, the last 3 of which have been very much intense and with much upheaval. And I would be interested in getting to the root of what causes this to keep coming back all the time. And I would argue that we need measured, and as I saw of Chief Hughes, even before he was Chief Hughes, throughout the early stages of this, he had an approach which would help to de-escalate these situations. I still believe longer term, for the city, for the financial benefit, for the ease and peace of mind of everybody in the city or in those who are visiting, that it would be best if we would de-escalate all the passions that circle around this this really unfortunate part of Fullerton's history. And so my concern, again, in asking questions on this, and I wasn't getting answers, was to bring it back, not to re-enliven that discussion or that debate, but to try to get at whatever it is that's causing ongoing turmoil of this sort. And if that is certain actions by our police department, our police agency, we have a responsibility as council members to ask those questions, even if they're uncomfortable, even if they're painful. and I intend to live up to that responsibility to the fullest. But I do look forward to speaking with you, Chief, and you have offered to provide many details, which at this point that I'm certainly not in possession of those details. And so my final opinion or judgment as to the nature of some of these, I'll have an opinion. You have the authority to carry out the job as you see fit. But I would appreciate obtaining those details, and perhaps that could greatly give me comfort in terms of understanding why this was done, and maybe buying into whether it's necessary or not. I will remain open-minded about that, but it does require my ability to audit that information. That's very important.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Councilmember Flory, any remarks you would like to make?
Just a few. Context is everything. When I came on council after a very contentious election in November 2012, I had been attending a lot of the city council meetings. At the time that Kelly was killed, Michael Sellers was our chief. I do not believe that the chief handled the situation well at all. In fact, it was actually pretty dreadful how he handled it. Then there was an interim chief that came on board for a very short period of time. He retired out. And in January 2012, before I was on the council, Dan Hughes was appointed as the interim chief. In September, the police department had experienced a top-to-bottom audit by Michael Giannacco, who was well known in these areas for being able to audit police departments. And he came up with a very, very lengthy report. And at the end of the day, there were something like 59 recommendations that he had. In between the time that Dan Hughes was appointed interim chief and that report was given 8 or 9 months later, he had already enacted approximately 2/3 of those recommendations. By December, Dan Hughes had turned around a lot of the members of this community. Many members of Kelly's Army came forward to vouch for him when it came time for the new council, the newly constituted council, to select a chief. We had one member after another of the community coming up here to say that they wanted Dan Hughes to be the police chief. I didn't know Dan that well, and so I was I listened to all of that. I will confess that when Kelly was killed, I had some experience with him because my office was downtown for 12 years, and that experience was not good. And when I first learned of his death, this is what I said. Oh, homeless person, resists arrest, same old, same old. I mean, I was that cavalier about it. But it was after I visited an art show that Stephen Baxter curated, Art with an Agenda, that dealt with the Kelly Thomas tragedy, that I finally got it. I finally got it. But it took me some time because events unfolded slowly. That picture of Kelly Thomas didn't get published for many months after his death. And this chief has had to struggle mightily with a department that was torn asunder, with a city council that was in disarray, with a recall, all kinds of fallout from that. His hands were tied in his ability to handle the situation by state legislation. In fact, somebody here mentioned the POBAR, and that's an important part of it. It was not this chief who filed charges. It's the Orange County District Attorney, and if you ask me, I believe that was seriously mishandled, but that's water under the bridge at this point. And I don't know what Chief Hughes can say about the context, talking about context again, of what the police department was expecting when the verdict came in. I mean, keep in mind, we didn't know how that verdict was gonna go.
Really.
And we certainly didn't know
I could see by the surprise.
that it would come in as quickly as it did. At the time, the police department, is it okay to say you were receiving bomb threats? And I did. Is it okay? Bomb threats, anonymous was attacking the city's computer system. And the fact of the matter is, this chief has to be
I didn't get the memo
for
on
all
that.
sorts of exigencies, and they really didn't know what was happening. I had just come back from Cuba at the time, and I was on a plane coming in when, I mean, that was a good experience to be in a third world country. But I was hearing about what was happening in January, as soon as I landed in Miami. And I didn't have a clue what was going on. But
I
in any
still don't know
event,
if you
I do
do.
support our chief. I support the
I'm sure you do.
actions that he has taken to make his department more transparent. The copy of that annual report is the second one that we have received. I was on city council for 8 years, 12 years ago. I never saw an annual report. I never saw an open house that was open for the public. And something else too, I have seen this chief in virtually every single fundraiser, every single community event, and he leads by example. And what I have noticed, the difference between this chief as opposed to chiefs that we had before, was that his police department is engaged. And I see them at community events at Love Fullerton, places where they're helping people. Many of the homeless people on our streets have very frequent contact with our 4 homeless liaison officers. We never had homeless liaison officers before Dan Hughes became chief. And I dare say that some of those officers have been exceedingly helpful to our homeless population, which is something that we struggle with
And in closing,
all the time. In any event, I don't have any sage things to say, but it's a dreadful situation. I share some of Councilmember Whitaker's concerns, and I will want to know more about this particular incident and try to get to the bottom of it too.
Thank you. Ask the chief, are we experimenting with cameras on being worn by officers?
We've actually completed our experience with 5 different companies. I've taken it to my community advisory board. We have discussed it. We've talked about the cost involved in that, and then I will be coming back to this council probably the next couple of months asking to utilize asset forfeiture funding to purchase body-worn cameras for every police officer. And so we will be doing that, and we're currently just contacting other agencies. Obviously, Rialto Police Department was one of the first agencies in Southern California to experience that. They had a decline in use of force incidents and citizen complaints, and therefore we've asked for their policy. We received that policy actually today. We were working with our policy company that kind of goes through our policy manual, and also comparing them with other policies that deal with body-worn cameras. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to come to you within the next couple of months with asking for funding for asset forfeiture for those body-worn cameras.
Thank you. I appreciate your involvement in the community. I've had a couple of mayors work days where we've got out in the community, and I appreciate the cops that came on their own time and helped out for those with that. I know we've changed our hiring dramatically from what it was, where the interview process requires, if I understand it, an interest in community service, or they're not hired. We also, for the first time, and again, this is my understanding, we are now putting young people who are the stars in the police cadet system through a police academy, and we hope we can hire them when they come through. I know that our homeless liaison officers and others also carry water, energy bars, until they run out bus passes and motel vouchers to help the homeless around town when they can. So I appreciate the change that you brought about, and I love to see you out in the community. I can't say enough good things. I also want to say that you've had 2 open houses, the first that we've had in more than 20 years. We have a third one coming up again in October. And I think everyone here, if they'd like to go through and see how officers are trained. When I went through, I was actually able to participate in training by a computer module that are used by the police. And I found that very interesting, and that's open to the public as well if they want to go through the open house. And so I thank you for what you're doing. This is just a discussion item. There's no action requested here. And so we're going to move on now to the next item.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I just had one quick question for the chief. Is there currently, or has there been training dealing with live streamers and the fact that you have people that may not be actively protesting, or maybe they are, but they're holding a camera, and how officers should or should not react or respond to that?
I'll be honest with you, we could care less if they're live streaming. I absolutely could care less. We were aware that there were 2 different individuals that were live streaming because we were watching them and actually gathering information from them, but it doesn't matter to me if they're live streaming or police officers at all.
But does it matter to the officers? Excuse me, please. But does it matter to the officers, the field officers, and how they react and respond? Is there any active training for that to deal with it?
They should always act as if they're being videotaped. Their conduct should be.
Are the live streamers press or not?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, now we're moving on to item 10. May we have a staff report?
Just a brief item. I'll introduce Laura Gina Mercer on, just to give us a quick couple notes on the required changes for the state minimum wage.
You know, I'm gonna move the recommendation. I read my agenda materials and it's very
Kevin
interesting.
Craig, Supervisor of the Year.
Kill Kelly?
Well, that was an interesting night, you guys. Thanks for being there with us.
Well, it's finally done.
Yeah, we're done for this show. Thanks for being there, everybody.